Lighting is arguably one of the most neglected and least understood topics for most beginner videographers and filmmakers. I know because I went several years in my video career before really taking the time to understand the elements of good lighting and how it can transform your image. So my goal in this video is to prevent you from making a lot of the early mistakes that I made and that I see many of my students making today. So I'm going to be sharing with you what I have found to be the top 10 lighting mistakes that I see beginners make, and to help me teach these lighting principles, I have on with me today Brady Bissett.
How's it going? I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to teach some lighting tips today.
Now, Brady runs his own YouTube channel. He's a very talented DP and gaffer, or lighting technician. We've personally hired him to gaff several of our projects, and I recently teamed up with him to create an all-new in-depth 30-video lighting mini course called Lighting Mastery. And we just launched it, so if you get some good value in this video and would like to further your knowledge on lighting, you can check that out in the description below, or as always, it is included in our full-time filmmaker course as well. But let's now dive into our first mistake.
Okay, so the first mistake that I often see beginners running into is overexposing your background or overexposing your environment. As a viewer, our eye goes to the brightest part of the image. So if the background of the window is much brighter than your subject itself, it's gonna be pretty distracting. A method that I use is actually to just expose for your environment first. So before you even bring in any lights, I make sure to stop down the camera, darken it, expose for the windows, expose for the outdoors, and then bring in lights selectively where you need it. So a prime example is, say you're shooting in the day inside by a window. Our first step is to stop down our camera so that window light in the background isn't blown out and really overexposed. And then the next step from there is to bring in a key light to bring up the exposure and the level on your subject. Then bring in any other lights that you need to bring up exposure wherever you need in your scene. So that way we keep the background and any windows in the scene exposed well as keeping a flattering light on your subject.
Which brings us to mistake number 2, and that is to have a flat image due to poor lighting direction. I have a whole separate video on my channel about this topic, but in that video I referenced a student of mine who said, "Why does my image look so boring? And this masterclass interview that I watched looks so cinematic." And the biggest difference between these two images is lighting. Specifically, the image on the left is flat and the image on the right is full of depth and dimension. And the way to create that depth is through light direction. Now, most rookies, when they place a light on their subject, think, well, I gotta light up my subject really bright, so they'll either put a light right in front of their subject or 2 lights equally bright on either side. Now, if you want a flat look, then that's fine, but if you want depth and dimension, you'll want to utilize shadows to shape the curvature of the face. The most common lighting pattern used in Hollywood films is called Rembrandt lighting, which is when you bring your key light about 45 degrees to the side of your subject and then slightly above your subject. This creates a drop shadow on one side of the face and underneath the chin, with a little pocket of light on the far side of the face. And then you can use fill light to decide how dramatic or undramatic you want that shadow to be. But the point is that shadows are good to help you set certain moods. Most rookies believe that the idea of good lighting is to eliminate all shadows. There is a time for that, but generally you want to position your light in a way that creates some shadows, which will give you depth and dimension to your subject to help it feel more three-dimensional and less flat.
So bringing us to the next topic, which is really understanding the difference between high and low key lighting, and also just understanding contrast ratios and really working with or without shadows. So you really want to make sure that you're conveying the mood accurately of your film, of your project, commercial, whatever it is. So as Parker mentioned, there are times where you're going to want to eliminate shadows throughout your entire image. And this kind of goes towards the direction of something called high key lighting, meaning eliminating a lot of the shadows throughout the entire frame, evenly exposed, not a lot of contrast. And you'll see this a lot in lighthearted stuff like comedies or romances. For example, in The Office, you see everything is very bright and evenly exposed throughout the entire frame. But to contrast that, and yes, that pun was very much so intended, there's a time and place for low-key lighting. That's really where you're embracing shadows. You have a lot of dark areas, a lot of shadow areas, and this you can see a lot more in stuff like thrillers or dramas or horror movies, where you're really creating this balance between your highlights and shadows in your image. And this is done so to create a desired mood, a desired feeling or emotion that you want your viewers to feel. You can also understand the direction of light and how it creates a shadow and really the mood that it conveys. So for example, say you've got this really intense thriller scene and you've got this really mean guy. You might have a light straight overhead your subject, because that's going to create these raccoon eyes, creating this mystery, like you can't see into their eyes kind of feeling. Then say you take that light from above and put it underneath, then you start to get this ghost story, horror, Halloween, spooky feeling of lighting, creating shadows in the other direction. So moving your light source around can do different things as far as the emotion that it conveys.
Now, light direction is just one element of great lighting. Another important element is light quality, which brings us to our next mistake, and that is the overuse of hard light. Most rookies don't understand the difference between soft and hard light and when to use each. The common mistake that I see is the overuse of hard light and not even realizing it. Hard light, which is less flattering on the face, makes blemishes and wrinkles more pronounced and creates harsher, abrupter shadows, whereas soft light is more flattering and more forgiving on the skin. This creates a more gradual shadow. Both hard and soft light have their place, but generally for key lighting a subject, you're going to want softer light, which can be created by having a large light source in relation to the distance to your subject. My first light I bought was a little 6-inch light source, and I'd use that little light source to key light my subjects. Now, it was better than having a poorly lit subject, but it wasn't very flattering. So I soon realized that I need to put a modifier in between that light source and my subject to make the light source bigger so it could be softer. But another mistake I see is people will put a nice big 3, 4, 5 foot diffuser on their light, but then they'll have that light 10, 15, 20 feet away from their subject. Remember that it's not just how big the light source is, it's how big it is in relation to your subject. To get soft light, it not only has to be a big light source, but that big light source has to be close to your subject. So the farther away your light needs to be for a wider shot, for example, then the bigger that light source needs to be in order to create soft light. That's why you'll see those huge diffusers on big movie sets, is to create soft light for a big area. And we're not going to go in depth about different diffuser material and modifier options in this video. We have full videos inside the course for that. But the point is, it's important to understand how to create soft light and when to use it. And on the other hand, hard light is great to use as backlights or to etch out or outline your subject, or great for athletes to show more definition in their veins and muscles. So they each do have their place, but understand what they do to your image and make light quality decisions accordingly.
So we talked about light direction, light quality, but let's go ahead and talk about light quantity, or I guess light output. And oftentimes a lot of us as beginners will find ourselves not having enough light in our scene. And especially nowadays, it's so easy to just jack up your camera's ISO. I mean, I've shot on the FX3 and you can shoot 12,800 ISO with a totally clean image. So why wouldn't you want to just pump that up? You know, makes it easy. But boosting your ISO should definitely be your last resort when it comes to bringing light into the frame. So if you want your scene to be brighter, your subject to be brighter, your first step should be bringing in more light. And even with these really dark, moody films that you see, you'd be very surprised as to how bright those are actually on the film set. Everything is going to be exposed really bright so you can get a very clean image on your camera sensor. And then that dark look is actually oftentimes brought down in post. Now, you don't always have control over the entire lighting. So there are times you will need to resort to stuff like your camera's ISO. Of course, if you can't stop down your lens to be brighter, you're gonna have to get exposure from somewhere, and that can be your ISO. So say you are on a shoot and you're shooting at night outdoors. Say your camera can't go any brighter, you're gonna get so much noise in your image with boosting your ISO, and you're like, this just looks terrible. Something to consider could be moving your subject to a different area with natural light, whether it be street lights or urban lights like city lights. So that way you're getting more exposure naturally, thus making your scene brighter. That way you don't need to bring up the ISO so high.
Now, on this topic of not having enough light, a common rookie mistake is to only light your subject and not the rest of your frame. Or as Brady teaches in the course, light spaces, not just faces. A telltale sign of an amateur film is when the only thing that's well lit in your frame is your subject and the rest of the frame is lifeless, or worse yet, completely black. Now, obviously there's a time and place for certain moods that you may want the rest of your frame black and just being able to see only the face, but most of the time you're going to want to give some life and dimension to your entire space, not just the face. Next time you watch a Hollywood movie, pay attention to how they light the background. They will still leave little pockets of dark shadows, but they will also add little pools of light through practical lights or exaggerated window light to give the scene more texture and contrast. When you have the dynamics of both bright and dark parts of your frame, this is often referred to as checkerboard lighting. So next time you're lighting a shot, if your background feels flat and lifeless and all the same exposure, consider adding a pocket of light or two to give the frame more dimension and contrast. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do this, just do what feels best for the mood you're trying to create.
So the next topic definitely does bleed in with lighting faces and spaces, and that topic is creating separation between your subject and your background. Now, oftentimes it's very easy to have your subject in a scene and they kind of just like blend into the background, especially if there's light colors, like a tan on a tan or a dark color on a dark color in the background. So to draw the viewer's attention towards your subject, you can do things like adding, say, a rim light or an edge light to your subject, which really tells the viewer there's a hard line separating them between the background. And you can even see it on me. I've got this edge light acting as a hair light kind of on my shoulder and my arm. You can actually see the light in the frame separating me from the background here. But also another method, rather than just using this as an edge light, is you can create pools of light behind your subject and outline them, whether it be a silhouette with light on the background and your subject not really lit, or just a contrasting pool of light as well behind them. It all comes back down to the creative choice of, do you want your subject to fall into the background and kind of fall into the shadow, or do you want them to be more predominantly in the frame, in the viewer's attention?
Now, with all of this light that you're going to be throwing around to create more depth and dimension in your image, a common mistake rookies make is overexposing the skin tones. Now, the first step to avoid overexposing skin would be to know what exposure skin tones should be sitting at. Now, there's no one straightforward answer to this. It depends on the color of the skin, also depends on the mood of your scene, whether you're doing high key or low key lighting, whether it's a horror or a light and airy feel. But generally, you want the key lit part of your face to sit between about 40 IRE and 75 IRE. IRE being the measurement unit used from 0 to 100 to show the brightness of your image on a waveform, and using the website ShotDeck to pull frames from Hollywood movies, and a tool called Classic Color Meter, the brightest IRE I could find for a key-lit part of the face in a popular film was around 75 IRE. There were some shots that had really bright backlights or rim lights that were being backlit by the sun, for example, that were meant to give a dreamy, light and airy feel that would get up in the 90s, but otherwise, most skin was in the 60s or 70s for the key-lit part of the face for lighter or brighter scenes, and in the 50s and 40s for dimmer scenes or darker skin. The lowest key light exposure I could find was at 36 IRE for a very dramatic shot of Daniel Craig in Skyfall. So again, somewhere between about 40 and 75 IRE is where you want to shoot for. As for the darker part of the skin, it just depends on how much fill light you want to add, but in the stills that I pulled, some of them got as low as 1 IRE. Well, the point is, when you're choosing your exposure in camera, in combination with choosing the amount of light output you want to add from your key light, pay attention to your waveform or your false color tools, and try and get your skin tones to sit at a healthy level. We won't cover using exposure tools in detail in this video. In the course, again, we show how to expose for skin properly, but when lighting your subject, make sure to keep your light quantity in check.
I hope we're doing good. We get a couple more for you. Now I want to get into light color. And I don't mean like red, green, blue. I mean color temperature and understanding what these numbers mean on a Kelvin scale. I'm sure you've heard the term Kelvin. Understanding color temperature and also the relationship that it has with your camera is very important to get a nice clean look or a desired creative look. Every white light source will have a different color temperature. Sun in the sky, middle of the day, is often something like 5,600 Kelvin. But then as it gets lower in the sky, you get something warm, nice like 3,200 Kelvin, or fire can be like deep 2,000 Kelvin. And then to contrast that, blues, cool tones like blue hour after the sun has gone down, that can be as cool as like 8, 9, 10,000 Kelvin on this scale. Say if you're indoors and you really want like a clean white look, but a lot of the lights in your scene have these 2,700 Kelvin lights, these really warm tungsten lights. You're gonna need to change your camera's white balance to say, well, 2,700 Kelvin is what I want to be white. So you drop that down, it'll cool everything down and make it more white. But like I had said before, rules are meant to be broken. We don't always need to have this clean white look with your lighting. And that's where we get into this creative direction of things. Let's say there's this scene in Ozark where there's a conversation being had over the phone between a character in Mexico and a character in the United States. And when the scene is going back and forth, you can see that the character in the US is very cool, contrasted by, this warm look as well when it's on the character in Mexico. And this could either be done with your lighting, but it could also be done in the color grade as well, pushing towards this warm and cool direction in the post-production process. And since we're on the note of color, we can talk about something called color contrast. Adding color contrast with lighting to your frame does a great job of creating depth, dimension, and visual interest into your image. Now, a great example of this could be, say, a night scene. You've got your subject sitting next to a very warm household lamp. But then to contrast that, we've got a very cool tone moonlight coming through a window, and we see warm and cool tones a lot, like this orange and teal or orange and blue color contrast, probably the most in Hollywood. We are also always used to seeing these warm and cool tones matching up. We've got the sun contrasting with the blue sky and the moonlight with household lamps inside. We see a lot of these warm and cool contrasting color tones in our day-to-day life, so it just feels familiar. We talk about all of that in the course because we don't always need these complementary colors of just, across the color spectrum. Sometimes it's great to have a monochromatic look, all one color, but it's important to, when possible, say like, oh, well, a warm lamp could look nice on this very cool scene.
And that wraps up our top 10 lighting mistakes we see beginners make. Again, keep in mind many of these mistakes are only mistakes if used accidentally in the wrong situation. It's important to learn the rules and principles of light and then intentionally choose the lighting you want to use to create certain moods rather than accidentally creating moods that contradict your story rather than add to it. Again, lighting is a huge part of great cinematography and storytelling, so we highly recommend taking the time to further your education on lighting, and that's why I've commissioned Brady to put together this all-new 30-video lighting mastery mini course within Full-Time Filmmaker.
So we spent months prepping, shooting, editing this course to be ready for you, and I'm excited to finally have it available to you. So the way that I formatted this course is into a 5-chapter structure. So chapter 1 is the basics, and this is really tailored towards beginners. Say you're just wanting to get into the film world. This chapter is going to be great for you. It's going to teach you stuff like dictionary terms and definitions, things that you'll hear on a real film set on location, and then also stuff like set etiquette, how to behave, and this dynamic that you're going to see on a set. And many more topics like this are going to be in chapter 1.
Chapter 2, we dive into the technical side of lighting, like understanding quality of light, when and how to diffuse light, light color, light direction, and so on. In Chapter 3, we focus on modifying light and show you the art of shaping and controlling light to create wide varieties of looks and moods for your videos or films.
Now, Chapter 4, now we're starting to really learn everything here. I like to think of this one as almost an internship. Now we're really seeing all of these topics that we've learned applied in real life scenarios, like shooting outdoors, lighting for a moving subject, shooting for a wide and a tight shot as well.
And then in Chapter 5, we have and will continue to add job shadows to show you how to work in real-world client scenarios so that you can feel comfortable to light like a pro no matter what challenges are thrown at you. So there you have a look at what's inside lighting mastery. Even I have learned some great things from Brady in this course. So if you want to up your lighting game, link below to join today, or again, it is also included in our Full-Time Filmmaker membership as well. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more free content just like this. Also, head over to Brady's channel to subscribe for more free lighting tips. And if you have any further questions, please let me know.